Good. So as I was saying, we're going to continue with our three-part series this week on the three descriptions given to the holy person according to the tantric siddhas. And this week is Madman, which is just about the most outdated, un-PC term you could use, but I'm sorry, that's what they said. So you'll have to forgive me. I'll continue using the term through the evening, but it is a bit on PC, isn't it? But there you go. Well, one of the things that we've been doing, and you might have noticed, we've sort of working with a new format in Monday night as of last week. So we'll be doing a little bit more where we get you to discuss, well, what you think you might actually be being got at here. The great advantage of that is I have to do less work and you have to do more. So that's what we'll do, is we'll do that again this evening. So what I thought we could do is just get into groups of three now, and for a few minutes, introduce yourselves, and just for a few minutes, what we'll do is we'll discuss what do we think is being got at with this descriptor of madman, yeah? In describing the holy person as a madman or like a madman, what's being got at? What is it about the spiritually wise, the spiritually mature, that takes on the sort of likeness of madness? Yeah. So just do that now, and I'll ring a bell, and we'll come back again. So what do people think? What might be got at here with this descriptor, with this likening?
What came to me anyway was someone who doesn't adhere to the kind of societal conventions, like being in a relationship, someone who's not been in a relationship for 30 years,
yes,
or someone who can't hold down a regular job because
yes,
they're not hardworking enough or conscientious enough, or they can't fit in.
That's right.
Into kind of what is psychologically sound.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you've just given the class, I'm afraid. That's but that's it exactly, isn't it? Yeah. Maybe we could expand on that a little bit more. What do people think?
Or maybe somebody who sits by the Bodhi tree until they become enlightened.
Yeah, which in a sense requires a sort of level of madness, doesn't it? A sort of commitment that's almost kind of mad in its zeal in that sort of sense. Yeah, people would probably have thought, what's he doing? What's the Buddha doing when he did that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think oftentimes there's like a characteristic of them is that they have like a really strongly held belief on something. Like you mentioned commitment, but some sort. Yeah, so I feel like that is sort of like oftentimes one of the characteristics.
Yes.
Of madmen in general, but especially spiritual.
So they're absolutely single-minded, aren't they? Yeah. And people, when we fall into sort of madness, we can become actually completely sort of taken over by something, can't we? Yeah. And the spiritually mature will share that as well. Often be very, very single-minded. It's all of those. We could say a lot more. It's all of those. One of the things I was thinking with this when I thought about this particular one was the story of Padmasambhava. And some of you will know Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava took Buddhism from India to Tibet. And he has this whole big, long sort of life story. The life and liberation of Padmasambhava is really, really, I suppose just kind of spiritually genius text. And it goes right back into his early life, and his early life, because it's semi-mythic and semi-historical, often parallels the life of the Buddha as well. There's sort of echoes of the life of the Buddha in the life of Padmasambhava. And in his early life, Padmasambhava is kept in the palace. He's sort of adopted by a king, and the king wants Padmasambhava to become king eventually as well, just like the Buddha. And so Padmasambhava doesn't want to do this at all. Yeah, he doesn't want to do this at all. So what he does is he starts to find ways of getting himself out of it. And one of the ways that he does that is to start acting more and more, excuse me, more and more unconventionally, yeah, more and more mad, as it were, which culminates in all this sort of like, so all of this kind of like really outrageous stuff. He does all of this really outrageous stuff that would be genuinely shocking. And it culminates in him dancing naked with his consort on the ramparts of the city wall. Yeah? Dancing naked with his consort of the ramparts of the city wall, which back then would have been absolutely outrageous. Would have been a Brahmin society back then, a Hindu caste society, and dancing naked on the city wall for a prince was really not the done thing. Yeah, really, like, it was desperately sort of embarrassing, and his whole aim was to be exiled from the city and to be relieved of this need to take up the kingship of the kingdom. But I think it goes deeper as well. There's symbolism in that as well, in the sense that, well, what Padmasambhava was doing was seemed mad. It looked mad to normal sort of worldly eyes. It looked completely sort of crazy. And you've had this actually right down through the religious tradition, right down through all religions. Actually, you've had this tradition of divine madness. They call it divine madness. In every single religious tradition, you've got some example of this. In Christianity, for example, you've got Pentecostals, don't you? If you ever see Pentecostals, they look like they have the most fun ever in church. Yeah? The Pentecost refers to when the Holy Spirit descended into the disciples after Jesus died, and they all started talking. So they sort of run it. This was a Pentecostal now. They sort of start running around the room and and praising the Lord and everything like that. Yeah. So you've got this strong tradition that runs right down through Christianity in that particular way, but also in Islam through the Sufi movement, and in Buddhism as well. Yeah, it runs all the way through. Now, what this I think represents is the sort of, particularly in Padmasambhava's case, is the rejection of convention. Yeah, so just like Georgia was saying, the rejection of convention, the rejection of orthodoxy. What would have been very, very strong in Padmasambhava's day is a very set ways of doing things. So when we think of orthodoxy, we think of established set ways of doing things that have sort of hardened into a solid shell and which have become unquestioned and dogmatic. Yeah? So religion does this, especially religion that becomes institutionalized, including Buddhism as well. It starts off often from a very, very strong space of spiritual inspiration, and then very often loses that fuel, that initial flame of spiritual inspiration, and often just hardens into convention. Yeah? Orthodoxy, received wisdom, dogma, tradition in the worst sense of the word, orthodoxy in the worst sense of the word. All of those things into a sort of set of dogmatic beliefs and rites that then can't be questioned. And what Padmasambhava was getting at when he did that was he was saying it's not about that. Yeah? It's not about orthodoxy in that particular sense. Particularly in Buddhism, there's said to be lots of different sort of sources for this divine madness in various different religious traditions. In Buddhism, it seemed to be a way of skillful means. It's a deliberately done to shock, or deliberately done to wake people up out of a set and specific way of doing things, which has become hardened and sort of unquestioned. So what Padmasambhava was doing in dancing naked on the ramparts was basically questioning or looking to pop this orthodoxy that had established itself, and it basically becomes spiritually dead. Because we know that's what happens when orthodoxies take over. Things become spiritually dead, don't they? They no longer have any sort of meaning or significance to them. You have to do them because you were told to do them as a child, or you were told to do them that's the way that we do these things. But Buddhism has a very, very, actually quite a strong critique of this. what we often say is it's fundamentally a critique of superficiality. Yeah? The orthodox way of doing something, or the ritualized and deadened way, ritualized to the extent of becoming dead, is basically superficial. It's a superficial way of doing religion and spirituality. It sort of looks like it, very, very on the surface level, but doesn't get beneath into something of sort of real, of a real sense of kind of vividness and life to it. So for example, one of the fetters that needs to be overcome in the Buddhist tradition, there's said to be 10 fetters that need to be overcome in searching for and gaining enlightenment. One of them was attachment to rites and rituals. Yeah? So the third fetter is attachment to rites and rituals. And in the Buddha's day, that would have been very, very strong. You would have had a very strong Hindu Brahmin caste who would have had very set and specific ways of rites and rituals that would have been means and ends in themselves. So what that fetter means is attachment to those rituals as an end in itself, as opposed to a means to an end, yeah? As an end to itself. So in the Hinduism of the Buddha's day, you would have had tending the sacred fire. You would have had various sort of rituals that were observed just to be observed, yeah? Just as a sort of end in itself. Now, Buddhism would say that ritual is very, very important. It's very, very good. It's a very, very strong way of developing faith, of developing emotion, of pointing yourself in the direction of the Buddha and his teaching. But they're not ends in themselves. Yeah? Doing them as an end in themselves without that source of inspiration behind it, without it being a means towards spiritual growth, doesn't get you anywhere. This is a very, very strong critique of attachment to rites and rituals and ends in themselves, which is basically conventionality, yeah? Or basically superficiality. Those two things are basically intertwined. So it's kind of the desire to be seen to do something for the sake of doing it. I was talking to somebody recently. She was Sri Lankan Buddhist, and of that background anyway. And she grew up in Australia, and she was telling me in her temple in Australia, ethnic Sri Lankan Sinhalese temple, a Buddhist temple in Australia that she used to go to. Used to come in, and there would be a fundraising leaderboard on the board. You know? So whoever donated that much money that month or so was at the top of the leaderboard. Now, I'm a fundraiser here for the London Buddhist Centre, and I was thinking, God, that sounds like a pretty good idea, actually. I could see me doing that. You know, you could have a little sort of system where people sort of, just as you walk in, you sort of names right up at the front, who's the best donor. But the problem with that is that what it very, very quickly becomes is spirituality as being done to be seen to be done. Yeah? When we do something to be seen to be doing it. That's where basically conventionality goes, superficiality goes. It's I'm doing it because it's fashionable to do, because my neighbours do it, because my parents did it before them, because I want my children to do it. So it's doing it to be seen to be doing it, basically to keep up appearances. Yeah, that's what this conventionalized way of religion and spirituality is. And it's very, very caught up with group dynamics as well. That's the other thing about it. It tends to be each group, each sort of, because we all belong in sort of tribes and groups, don't we? Something that you have to try and transcend with the spiritual life. But each group has a very specific set of rules and conventions that have to be adhered to, and just adhered to because you are of that group. Yeah. So I'm a Muslim, so I do this. I'm a Buddhist, so I do this. I'm a Christian, so I do this. Maybe no particular understanding as to why you do it, other than the fact that you do it because you're a member of that group. And this runs very, very strongly throughout all groups. Yeah, the superficiality convention, doing something to be seen to be doing something, runs through national groups, religious groups, class groups, friendship groups, family groups, all of those sorts of things. And you do it because you are a member of that group without maybe necessarily any understanding as to why you do it. So very, very caught up in group dynamics in that way. It's interesting that very often, for example, that in the history of psychotherapy, psychology, very often it was used as the term mad or lunatic or whatever it might be, was used as a way of punishing or locking up those that didn't conform to conventional standards. So in Ireland, for example, very often women that had babies outside marriage were deemed mad and often then locked up in asylums for years. So there was a mould broken in Catholic conventionality, and very often the label mad or lunatic was used punitively as a way of sort of removing them from society, removing people who didn't sort of conform in that way to particular behaviours from society. So it's superficial in that way. What was that, Tanya? I know, yeah. Well, just a few more minutes. Don't worry, that's all right. Don't panic. So there's a story of my just to sort of illustrate this a little bit, and to give you a bit of a sense as to what this sort of means. I often tell the story of my two grandmothers. So one of my grandmothers, both of them were Christian, and one of my grandmothers from my mum's mum and one with my father's mum. Now my father's mum was one of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life. Yeah, she had this sort of affection or love to her that was just completely tangible. My dad used to have all of these children come in from the social care services for a year or two, and then leave again, which my grandmother would take in, children from broken homes, for example, or violent backgrounds or whatever it might be. And they'd come in for a year or two, and then when the family got settled again, or when the family situation was better, they'd go back. And my grandmother just kept on taking in these kids every couple of years, and adopted children as well, sort of full time. And many of them actually stayed in touch with my grandmother right into their adulthood, and really remembered her very fondly for the sort of love and affection that my grandmother gave. She died of cancer, my grandmother, but she got an initial diagnosis of cancer, and then she kept it. She had it treated. She told everybody it was fixed, and she knew it wasn't fixed, and basically kept it secret. So she knew she was dying for basically 2 or 3 years, but she didn't want to sort of worry anybody in the family. So she kept this thing to herself for 2 or 3 years, and then died. I remember always the last time I visited her, I went to her. She was very, very weak at that point. And still, with her last dying breath, she was asking after me. I was doing this sort of Strictly Come Dancing tango thing at the time, and she wanted to know all about it. And I still remember her just encouraging me with her last moments, still sending out love with her last moments. Now, that particular grandmother was a very, very devout Christian woman, and for her, that love that she expressed was Christ's love. Yeah, it was an extremely alive and vivid love that she expressed through her religious beliefs. I'll turn this back on now. Now, in comparison, my father's mum, I should say, also a very devout Christian woman, but very conventionally so. Yeah, my mum used to tell the story of how they were brought to Mass 3 times on Christmas Day before they can open any of their presents. Yeah, that was the rule. There was mass 3 times before they could open any of their presents. And she was in her own way a very good woman. My mum's mum as well, my granny Tracy. But she really could. She could use her religiosity to really sort of bang you over the head. Yeah, it was almost a way of kind of imposing social control. And if somebody didn't go along with sort of strict Catholic standards, my grandmother would really let them know about it, basically. Interestingly enough, my mum's mum, died at the age of 92 or 93 and was terrified of dying. Yeah, terrified of dying. She'd been deeply devout her whole life, done everything that she was supposed to do. And here she was right at the pearly gates, or so she should have thought, and was really, really terrified of dying. Yeah? So there you go. You have 2 lives, one led in the sense of conventional religiosity, one led from a much more sort of vivid place of alive religiosity, and you had 2 very, very different outcomes. So that was basically the, I believe, what the Padmasambhava is getting at when he was dancing at the ramparts. He was saying, look, conventional religiosity is not going to work. It doesn't work. No. So what I thought we could do, what I'll do is sort of all a little bit of an experiment, is I thought we could do a little bit of ritual, but I thought we could do it with heart. Yeah. So we don't do ritual from the basis of conventionality, or we try not to here. And of course, sometimes we can do that, can't we? In a puja, we can sort of just get through it. Come on, and we can see it as sort of not the real thing. We can see it as we're just doing it to do it. Yeah. But how about we were to try and evoke something of emotion and devotion and aspiration in the ritual. Yeah. So what the ritual is basically designed for. So not conventionally, not ritualistically in the sense of in a dead sort of way, but with real sort of life. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we'll just meditate briefly, and then I'll start us in a Padmasambhava mantra, and why don't you set up for the meditation now? I'll start us in a Padmasambhava mantra, and then just come up and make offerings. Yeah. So that's what we're going to do at this point. Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava. Om So the danger with all of this sort of teaching is, and the danger with any spiritual teaching is, we can just pick it up in a way that works very, very well with our own ego. And it's a particular danger with this teaching at the moment, because currently I think it would be safe enough to say the sort of major kind of zeitgeist in thinking is very individualistic. Yeah. Groups don't have group in the sense of sort of strong national groups or religious groups, just don't have the same sort of strength and ability to impose convention like they did in, say, the 50s or 60s. There's still a very strong sense of convention, but it's become much more subtle. So we can take this teaching and sort of go, oh, that's so me. You know, I am so breaking convention. Like, I'm such an individual. You know, all the marketing is like, are you doing you? You know, break the mold. Yeah. It's like, it's runners, for crying out loud. Like, you know, it's like that's so me. Those are like in my runners. I'm so breaking the mold. You know, that's like all that sort of thing. So there's a real danger that we go, yeah, that's me. Yeah, when we think of these teachings, but it's not likely to be us. Yeah. We're likely to be much more conventional than we like to think of ourselves. Yeah? So why don't we just, again, let's group up now and think about, okay, where do we fall into this issue of superficiality? Let's think of superficiality and sort of doing to be seen to be done, to be seen to be doing something, that sort of way. Where do we fall into that in our own lives? Where do we fall prey to this? And where could we sort of break out of it a little bit? Yeah? So why don't we do that? I'll ring a bell again in a few minutes' time. Introduce maybe somebody new that you didn't talk to last time, and go from there. Yeah.
Being conventional in sort of surface level communication, kind of having a script of, oh, hi, X person, how are you, or what do you do, or how's things been going lately?
Yeah.
And of course, it's like nice to ask those questions, but it doesn't really break through into real communication.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Half of the time, I think I'm not really listening.
Yes, that's right. I used to go hitchhiking when I was a kid in Ireland. I'd hitchhike everywhere. You become an expert at talking about the weather as a hitchhiker, as a young fella in Ireland, because people could talk about endless gradations of weather as you went through. It was purely. In Buddhism, interestingly enough, we'd call that superficial speech. It's one of the 4 speech precepts that you take on to avoid when you become an order member. So it's interesting that, this issue of conventionality is inherently in itself superficial. And that's the sort of thing that we're talking about, isn't it? It's superficial speech. It's where you get endless sort of chit-chat that doesn't go anywhere deeper. You need to be able to do the chit-chat, don't you? Because you can't just go into the deep and meaningfuls. That's a bit scary. But you need to be able to sort of gradually move away from that into something of a more significance in conversation. Yeah. So I think that's a good example. Yeah. What about others? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So So marketing a certain variety of yourself to the world, which is basically what conventionality is, isn't it? It's sort of projecting a certain way that you are, the way that you want to be perceived out onto the neighbours. That's very strong. Again, I can only use it because I've a reasonably strong experience of conventionality in Ireland. Family life in Ireland can be very strongly like that. It's like everything is fine as long as you're keeping up appearances with the neighbours, basically. It could be total chaos in the family. All these skeletons and darkness and everything like that could be the case. But as long as you're keeping up appearances, it's absolutely fine. Yeah. Maybe one more if there was somebody else.
As you were saying, as you were speaking, I was just thinking everything has a layer of superficiality.
Yeah.
It's actually really hard for it not to be
Yeah.
superficial.
Yeah.
We really need to kind of like constantly be intentional
Yes.
for it not to be superficial.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. You'd probably have to be. Well, maybe you'd have to be really spiritually wise and mature and developed for your life to be completely, horrible term, authentic, but completely sort of spontaneous and you in that sort of sense, and deep, not in that kind of pious sort of sense, but not superficial. Yeah, it's very hard. I think you're right. I think it's very, very hard to get below surface level superficiality.
And I think there's also a wish of people to put things that are unconventional into boxes so that they become conventional. So in the moment in which you're unconventional and you're boxed, you need to be coherent with your unconventionality. And if
That's
you
right.
step out of that unconventionality towards a different kind of
That's right.
conventionality, then
Yes.
it becomes confusing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so one of the things that you see now more and more, and that's a good point, I'll keep going from there, but one of the things that you see now more and more is a group of people who've left the group who's left the group, yeah? Where you get a sort of fashionable unconventionality come about, where it's like you're told how to be unconventional. And if you break the mold from that unconventionality, how you're told to be unconventional, you'll get ejected, basically. It's like, no, this is how you dress, act, talk, think. I was thinking that's probably the more significant one that we'd want to think about in terms of group conventionality, that in sort of East London, trendy liberal East London that we sort of fall into. It's the fashionable opinion stated at just the right time, yeah? So it's sort of like, isn't Brexit awful? Stated at just the right time. I was so against Brexit, all that sort of thing. I was like, awful. I think it's really awful. Such idiots that did that. Yeah. It's aren't I a wonderful person because I hold this particular opinion? Yeah. I'm in a group with you. We're part of the lovely people group. Yeah. Who holds all the right opinions, which make us nice, and that out group there who hold all the wrong opinions, i.e. just about anything to the right of Jeremy Corbyn. Awful people, horrendous people. Yeah. So you get more of that, I think, sort of conventionality. Religious conventionality just doesn't exist in our society anymore, unless you're in a sort of ethnic minority that's just sort of, you have a pocket of them that's sort of conservative still. That sort of religious conventionality doesn't tend to be very strong in sort of broad mainstream society anymore. I think it's more in this sort of pocketing and siloing of particular political tribes, actually. Liberal, probably more so around, East London and conservative in pockets of the country as well. I think it tends to be more like that. But there's another aspect to this teaching as well, which I think is something like what the spiritually wise do, and I think Cash Mitra was getting at something like this in the it may be a bit to a tangent, but somewhere in this area during the announcement, what the spiritually wise do, what the spiritually mature do, is they fully integrate their non-rational, they fully integrate their madness, yeah, They fully integrate their sort of non-rational side. That's what the spiritually wise do. And we all have that. We've become very, very what we sort of call left brain dominated. Yeah. So you hear this term, and we've had sort of people will hear maybe Macho Bandu and some of the elders around the centre talk about Professor Ian McGilchrist, who talks about this left brain and right brain divide. And McGilchrist talks about it in a way that the left brain has become very culturally dominant. So the left brain is rational, logical, linear, abstracted, non-contextual, all of those sorts of things. The right brain tends to be more emotional, more non-rational, more contextual, more engaged, more poetic, more colourful, all of those sorts of things. And what McGilchrist thinks is that we've all become much, much more left-brained. Yeah? What that means is because the left-brained way of thinking about things, the rational logical way of thinking about things, is often feels very, very deeply threatened by emotion, by poetry, by non-rationality, all of those things. So there can be a very strong attempt to push away from that in our own lives, particularly if we've become sort of captured, as the way McGilchrist would talk about it, by our more sort of logical, heady sort of life. If we've become alienated from our emotional life, if we've become alienated from our physical life, if we've become alienated from our mythic life, all of those things, yeah, the emotions and the more illogical side of our psyche, which we all have, can start to look very, very threatening. It feels that part of us feels threatened by it. That separates us, yes, because so much of the path is dependent on being connected, in having being integrated fully with our mythic sides, with our non-rational sides, with our emotional sides. Spiritually, there's so much wisdom in that sort of area. In fact, people like McGilchrist would say the vast majority of wisdom is actually contained within that area. It's in a wisdom that's sort of contextual and relational, and can't really be written down in terms of rules and formulas, because it's not like that. It plays itself out in situations and is applied in situations. And of course, if we're not connected with it, we'll look towards rules and formulas and conventions to actually lead our life, as opposed to living it from a more sort of spontaneous, creative basis. It was interesting that Sangharakshita, Bhante Sangharakshita, he spent about 20 years of his life in India, and one of the things that he said was that mad people were much more accepted and less feared in India than they are in the West. When he came back to the West, he noticed very often that what we do in the West, like I was saying, is lock people away who demonstrate signs of sort of being irrational, mad, all of those things, oftentimes outside of convention. We lock them away. What Bhante was saying, what Sangharakshita was saying, was that actually in India you won't notice this happen at all. There's not the same sense of threat from those people. And what he thought was that the Indian psyche had integrated their non-rational side, i.e. you could say their mad side, much better than those of us in the West, which didn't make them feel as threatened when they were confronted by that sort of thing. Now, in India, it comes with its own problems, because, you know, if you ever look at, say, for example, how violence can be whipped up in a crowd of people in India, it can happen much more quickly. It can happen here, as we've seen in the last few weeks. But it can often happen in India much quicker, because, again, there's much more sort of access to that sort of more raw emotional side. You'll see it again in rituals and pujas in India, very, very sort of ecstatic, often to the extent of losing connection with mindfulness, or a sense of groundedness, of a sense of equanimity. You know, so there's problems come with that side of being over sort of weighted in one particular way, but we have our problems with it as well. I remember once, I was many years ago, a few years ago, if you ever go on retreat, what we have to do is we have to, if you're an order member on the retreat, you do these meditation reviews. And I had this one particular individual who I mean, I don't know, he was, in a sense, he was very put together and stable. He had a job, he got by in the world, but he was completely crackers. Yeah? He had absolutely no connection with reality whatsoever. So we thought he was enlightened, for example. So he came in during this meditation review, where I'm usually meant to ask him a few questions about his meditation and, you know, just talk about it a bit. And he started saying, well, look, I'm enlightened, so I could give you a teaching if you like. And it was very interesting noticing my response. I was absolutely terrified of him. I was absolutely terrified of him. Like I remember I was in this small little alley. They put me in the worst place. It was like this little hallway outside the toilets. And I was like a caged animal because he was between me and the door. And he was not violent in any way, sense, or form. He was not going to be violent. He was not going to be threatening in any way. In a lot of ways, he was very friendly. And I was petrified of him. Yeah? I used to dread this particular, I had 3 or 4 reviews with him. I used to dread it. And it was a very interesting thing for me because, you know, I haven't particularly integrated my non-rational side. I tend to be sort of more weighted in that particular way. So here it is, something I get confronted with something of the non-rational, of the non-logical, and I just don't know how to be with it. And it was a primal sense of threat. Like it was something like that I was deeply alienated from and really terrified of. Very, very interesting. Somebody else would have just, oh yeah, okay, give me a teaching. Let's have a chat, you know, tell me about it. But I was absolutely petrified of them. So I think we can really do that. We can sort of we can be very, very sort of alienated from those forces of myth, of poetry, of magic, of mystery, of spontaneity, of emotionality, all of those things. Because culturally, probably, we've just been encouraged more and more in that particular direction now. So I thought what we could do, how do we do this practically? How do we sort of get into connection with ourselves? So sort of what does that mean for us in sort of a day-to-day basis? How do we kind of connect with that capacity to sort of engage more with our non-rational side? What do people think? Connor?
Awareness?
2 seconds, yeah. We're just going to go over there and come back.
I was thinking, like, quite often, like, we have, like, impulses and tendencies and we immediately push them down.
Yeah.
Because it's, like, a part of ourselves that we're a bit unsure of, a bit afraid of. And so we do spend a lot of our life kind of, like, not allowing those things to come forward.
Yes.
And living in fear and suppression.
Yes, that's right. So an impulse that we might think might be disapproved of.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Oftentimes a very positive impulse as well. Like we might have a positive impulse towards a loving word or an act of generosity or something like that. And we fear the response from those around us and think, oh no, it's very unconventional, so we don't do it. Yeah. So acting more from that place.
Yeah, more from like a spontaneous place.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Anybody else?
Can I say something a bit rogue? Sorry.
Rogue.
I feel like, from my experience, like I am a very emotional driven person, and I've actually had to tone it down to cope with life. And I've also got ADHD, and I found it out recently. So it's like a really interesting place to sit, where it's like, how do we connect to that? But actually, I spend my day trying to disconnect so that I can function. So I just wondered, well, I guess if other people feel similar, and also like, what do you think about that? Because it's really hard to function if you are emotionally led. Like, I have to be like, don't let the emotions come in.
Right.
It's quite conflicting.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose we do need to be, particularly if we're in the grip of negative emotions, We do have to work with them to transform them. Like this isn't, say, for example, saying that we can sort of let go into the non-rationality of one's anger. Like I get my particular case, I get angry, I get grumpy, and I do know I can't. That it might be, yeah, it's non-rational, but so what? You know, it's not going to be beneficial for me or others. So yes, we do have to be discerning, don't we, as to what the basis of where we're acting from in that regard. But I think the first thing will be actually just becoming aware of those emotions. And oftentimes I find with awareness, they can be moved down to something more creative. So in the working with them, instead of sort of pushing them right down, okay, can we just be aware of them and just notice that they turn into something more creative and more positive? I think that's one way of working in that instance, yeah. You can't cut off from those emotions, neither can you give them full expression, yeah. Yeah.
In response to that, something resonates. I think the key thing for me anyway is for like really cultivating spaces for play.
Yeah.
And making sure that there are, which feels a lot of very antithetical to a lot of our capitalist society, making sure that there are parts of my life that I do purely for the joy of doing them, and for no other reason,
Yes.
no attachment to the outcome of those things. Like ideally something creative, but whatever it is to you. And having spaces, having times in your weekday life to do that allows for a safe environment to fully express. And so it sort of balances out the other times when you can't.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. So allowing yourself more where you can just be playful and play, as you say, without any particular orientation to anything sort of consequential or utilitarian, or because of course play can't be utilitarian. Kind of to be true play, it just has to be for the sake of play, doesn't it? So that, I think that's a very good example as well. Yeah. I think one of the things that can be good to think of in this way, in terms of just integrating more our non-rational side, more our mad side, even you could say, is just becoming more and more ourselves. Yeah? If you just become more and more yourself, you will naturally just start to express more of that aspect of yourself, the non-conventional aspect, the playful aspect, the creative aspect, and you'll do it in your own particular quirky way. Yeah. Sometimes if we're trying to be non-conventional, we'll do it from a very heady place, and it's oftentimes because we're just trying to be a bit edgy. Yeah. But actually, it won't be genuine. A genuine non-conventionality will be an eruption of positivity, an eruption of creativity that basically disregards whether it's sort of conventional or not. And where that will come from is becoming more and more yourself. It is one of the things of spiritual life. I think that the more that you spiritually practice, the more you become yourself. It's an interesting koan, because Buddhism would say there's no such thing as self. Actually, what it would say is there's no such thing as absolute fixed self, separate self. But what there is a certain patterning that we all have that I think becomes more and more naturally expressed, more and more freed of what we think we should be, or what people around us think we should be, or how we market ourselves to ourselves or other people, and much more in connection with a genuine sort of spontaneous expression of that sort of patterning. You notice this with order members. Order members are all weird. We're all just a bit strange. Yeah? You spend enough time around order members, they are all a bit quirky in a little bit of a weird way, or at least they should be. Yeah? One of the reasons is they've just become more and more themselves, and they've become more and more themselves in a way that integrates that aspect of them that is just a bit weird. Yeah. I could name names and give you stories, yeah, but I won't. I won't do that. I won't do it.
Could you give an example of like what you mean by a bit weird? Not necessarily a living example, but what do you?
I don't know. I mean, could you give an example?
Well, could you give it?
There you go.
Yeah.
Let's just do that back.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't planned, folks. I promise you. Yeah. Well, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because of course, quirkiness is it's hard to put your finger on it. People are quirky in a very sort of hard to sort of say sort of way. When you talk about people when they're being quirky, you say, God, they're a bit of a funny fish or something like that, and it's hard to sort of pin it down. But a full expression of ourselves will include a full expression of ourselves in a non-conventional way. I've had to try and do this. I'm trying to think of how am I a bit weird? I'm a bit weird, aren't I? So, how am I a bit weird? I don't know. It's just, but I've had to sort of, I tell loads of really bad dad jokes, actually. That's one of my really weird things to do. But basically, I've just sort of had to, or I can sometimes surprise myself in the nature of my communication. I'll become playful in a way where I'm not used to being particularly playful, or teasing, or kind of interact a way that I'm not, and it'll surprise me and it'll surprise the person that I'm with. But that only comes out of really integrating all of ourselves into a full creative expression of ourselves on a day-to-day. A lot of that is repressed, as Connor was saying earlier. A lot of that aspect of ourselves is repressed, and it's repressed because we think it's not wanted, or it hasn't been welcomed previously in our lives, or conventionally it's frowned upon. Sangharakshita interestingly said that he was much more interested in what people repressed positively than what they repressed negatively. He thought what they repressed positively caused much more damage to themselves than what they repressed negatively. Because ultimately what we repress positively, he thought, often turns back in on itself and becomes negative. If it's not given expression as positive, it'll turn back in on itself and become negative.
Could you say that again?
Yeah.
Right. Positive and negative is kind of like, I don't know.
Positive in the sense of spiritually positive.
Uh-huh.
If you don't express what's spiritually positive in you, emotionally positive in you, what often happens is in its unexpression, it turns back round and is harmful. Yeah. So one example might be if you don't act on an impulse towards loving speech, what might happen is actually not given expression, it comes back in and becomes destructive. It becomes actually aggressive towards you. Yeah.
Why do you think that is? That it's the unexpressed positive is more damaging than the unexpressed negative?
I don't know. It's interesting to think about, isn't it? We could take it away and think about it. I'll keep going if that's okay, but we can take it away and think about it. Sangharakshita also said, when he was talking about monks, he said they should appear not so much from another country as another universe. Yeah? So when you think about monks, when you come across monks or nuns, they should seem not so much from another country, i.e. they shouldn't just appear foreign in some sort of way or unrelatable in some sort of way like you do with somebody from another culture. They should appear as if they were aliens. Yeah? And what he's getting at is that monks or nuns should have become so much themselves, sort of become so sort of integrated their own sort of quirkiness, their own non-rationality. They should be so freed from conventionality, so freed from rites and rituals as an end in themselves, or superficiality, or any sort of touching stone on the basis of understanding each other that we do, on the basis of shared goals or whatever it might be. They appear as utterly from another universe. They should appear as aliens to us. Yeah? And I've often thought, well, if order members can't live up to that, they should at least appear from another country. So order members should at least appear from another country. They should be unrelatable in some sort of way. They should come off as a bit unrelatable in some sort of way. They should feel sort of unpredictable in that particular sense. Yeah. I'll say a little dream that I had, and then we'll do some meditation. I remember years ago on a retreat, I had this dream where my dad got remarried after myself and his mum, my mum and him got divorced. It was Freudian, wasn't it? Margaret, had a daughter who was completely wild. I mean, like impressively wild. Like pregnant to the local drug dealer at 17, had a real thing for like dangerous men and used to play them off, like really wild. Like we're not talking a little bit of middle class misbehaviour before you get the semi-detached. Yeah, we are talking like proper feral. In a way that I was quite impressed by actually as I got older. I was a bit disdainful of it when I was young. I actually got quite impressed by it when I was older. It was like she really gave that a good go. She turned out wonderful. She's very, very good, very good woman. I like her a lot, but she really had a wild moment. And in this dream, me and her have had a baby. Yeah? Me and her have had a baby. And we're sort of sat there on the couch, and my dad walks in and sort of looks really, and my dad's an authority figure, yeah? So in the sense of the dream, dreams can be so clever, because my dad, in the sense of the authority figure, is convention in this sort of sense. And the fact that I've had a child with Kirsty, who's a sort of stepsister, is deeply outside of convention. You know, this is the dream. It was such a good dream. It's like, that is such a clever dream when I realised, was thinking about it afterwards. And of course the baby in the dream, I realised afterwards, is a sense of union with that non-conventionality and something new coming out of that. And I remember in the dream actually Kirsty sort of slunk off. She was a bit sort of terrified of my dad in the dream. And my dad looked at me really sternly, and I just went, and that was it. Woke up. Yeah. So I really liked it as a dream, yeah, and I thought it pointed at something as sort of what we're looking to do with our spiritual lives. But if the way to do that is to become more and more ourselves, well, one of the ways to become more and more ourselves is to meditate. Yeah? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a little mindfulness of breathing, and we'll leave it at that for this evening.